Greetings, mythology students. This is our last week of material before we move into finals, the finals week. So what I'm going to do, since people are still sort of behind and catching up on the tasks, and also some people are still working on the paper, I'm going to condense this week's material into this video, do my best, and then the next video will be about tasks 11 and 12 and the final. Okay, so there'll be two videos coming at you. We're going to do this one right now on our last bit of study, and it is something that a lot of you will already have a good working knowledge of, and that is the thoughts and theories of two structuralist thinkers from the 20th century, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And I apologize if this is a review for some of you who are who have taken psychology or are studying in those fields. But a quick overview of these two thinkers and how they relate to mythology, and then a small task. So Freud is the one that you're probably the most aware of. Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939, considered the father of psychoanalysis, worked principally in the field of psychology, has a lot of influence on 20th century thought, and still is a powerful activist in terms of how we conceive of the psyche and the self and identity and things like that today. Still has a heavy hand in modern thinking, even though there are some people that now oppose him. So very basically, Freud believes that the self is broken down into three parts: the id, which is to do with your instincts; the ego, which is to do with your perception of reality; and the superego, which is how you value and place moral value on your experience. So the id is basically what he called the unconscious, which is guided by the pleasure principle. There's a whole work on this, how humans are wired principally for pleasure or enjoyment. There are two parts, and notice the names to these two parts. They're linked to mythology. Eros, which is the act of surviving, eating, sex, all of the things that you need to do as a human to survive, and the energy created from that part of you is what he called the libido. The other is the thanatos, which has to do with aggression and violence. And in most people, Freud believed that the eros was the stronger of the two, but there are certain members of society in which the thanatos supersedes the eros, and they're usually of criminal types. The ego develops from the id in infancy, and you developed the art of social acceptance, of fitting in. The superego is something that you develop in early childhood, where you identify with a same-sex parent. And it's also the part of your experience where you develop ideas about morality and social mores. During these periods, there are defense mechanisms that activate repression, denial, sublimation. And Freud maintained that you go through various stages, psychosexual stages, in your development, going from oral to anal, which is part of the ego, phallic, latent, genital, which is part of the superego, and that you experience this lowering of these defense mechanisms in dreams. And Freud linked dreams to the creation of mythology. That's why you have these crazy stories that sort of peel away taboos and things like that. And myths can be very, very strange. Dreams can be very, very strange. There are two things, of course, that develop in the phallic stage. One, and this is some of his most famous, two of his most famous ideas. One is the Oedipus complex, which is named after the myth of Oedipus, which is concretized by Homer and Sophocles in the plays. And of course, you know these terms. The father is competition, and the mother becomes a sex interest. and also linked to the development of castration anxiety and things like that. The lesser-known Electra complex is where the father is seen as a sex interest, as well as development of penis envy, and the person identifies with the mother. These are Freud's ideas. They sound strange when you lay them bare like this, but they actually are quite powerful and have taken root in our society. And we still perceive, even if we don't go all the way along with Freud, that it's these early childhood and developmental stages that we go through that shape a large part of who we are. And emotions and fears develop in our unconscious being, thus the need for myth and religion to counter, to counsel, to alleviate these fears and reckless emotions. Now when we come to Jung, Carl Jung, 1875 to 1961, he believed that myths and dreams are pathways to the unconscious, and his unconscious is slightly different from Freud's because he believes that all these mythological patterns coalesce to make up your unconscious, and that those are archetypes, and that the act of becoming individual is how you sort of develop all these archetypal forces to make up your particular psyche. He extended the idea of the unconscious, or sometimes we refer to it as the subconscious, to a communal thing, whereas Freud basically concentrated on the individual. Jung looked at the collective unconscious, things that we have in common. And you can already start to see how Joseph Campbell is influenced here. In this collective unconscious, we all participate in a collective story with our various personas. We have a primitive psyche which is a base on which we build, and these are also made up of archaic remnants of our past, of our history, of the earlier forms of humans that we used to be. These are instincts, psychological urges, often manifested in various symbols that we create, various fantasies that we have. We're sort of tapping into that primordial past. And these come up in dreams. And if you look up page 522 in your textbook, I think he lists 12 dreams that are rather like fairy tales. See if you have, if there are any of those dreams that you particularly share or have often. These are common dreams to all of us that we all have. Sometimes destruction, sometimes restoration, creation type motifs, but very similar nonetheless. And this doesn't really matter what your religious or cultural underpinnings are. Jung believed that humans crossed cultural divides and religious divides in that unconscious that he talks about. And these are static. These are not static, these are dynamic. So these are things that sort of change and shift and coalesce. They're in flux your entire life. You're making up your individual self, what Jung calls individuation, throughout your life. And the individuation process is an admixture of three things that he came up with. One is the shadow, the second is the animus or anima, and the third is the self, the product. In childhood, like Freud, Jung believed that there are feelings of uniqueness, and you have a sort of a wounding or a suffering, and sometimes this leads to a certain call about what you need to do with yourself. And this is the generative point of your personality, the point that founds most of your dreams and the mythologies that we create. But as you get older, you start to recognize a side of yourself that you're less aware of, that you're less confident of, a strangeness, a mystical side of yourself, which he calls the shadow. And the shadow is the unconscious part of your personality, not the whole unconscious, but just part of it that includes impulses, inert rage. And this shadow has the same sex as you are. So it's a same-sex entity, according to Jung, of who you are. And if you look on page 528, 529, there are some examples of how the shadow manifests. And there's certain layers and compartments that you can find in the shadow. The shadow can be a destructive element, and it can be a creative element. It can be a friend or a foe. So it can go either way. When we get to the animus anima, it depends, of course, on your sexual identity. An anima for men is the woman within. The dreamer will discover, or the thinker will discover, opposite sex personification in their subconscious or of their subconscious. So the anima is feminine tendencies in men's psyches, often shaped by the mother, and can also be positive or negative. By the way, mother or female guardian in your life. Positive or negative. Some of the positive aspects are the effeminate qualities men can develop, including honesty, introspection, compassion. The ability to be able to have a soulmate is considered part of your anima. The negative aspects, according to Jung, are depression, insecurity, fear, impotence, and even suicide. And the juvenile state of your anima is erotic fantasy. This is the primitive aspect that all men have to deal with, and in some cases transcend. Not all men ever do. And it works differently according to Jung. I have to keep specifying that these aren't my ideas. When it comes to the animus, which is the man within the female psyche, masculine psychological tendencies in women, which are manifested rather than erotic fantasy in what he called sacred convictions. And the animus was usually shaped by a father or a male guardian figure, and also could be positive or negative. The positive aspects were the ability to develop spirituality, and of course you may be at odds with that claim. Resolution, physical strength, conviction, and the negative aspects of the animus are theft, murder, the development of demons, according to Jung, brutality, emptiness, things like that. The self, which is a synthesis of all these elements, includes manifestations of new or growing forms. And the self has a center. It can be female or male. The female center manifests in things like priestess, sorceress, goddess, earth mother, male guardian, wise man or guru, spirit of nature. So that we all have a sort of spiritual center to us, which can be male or female, or the stronger tendency can be male or female, no matter what sex we are. And the idea is that the goal of our lives is to develop a cosmic state in which we develop or nurture or perfect this natural core that we have within us, as evidenced by people like Jesus, Adam, Buddha, Panku, who developed these potentials to the full. Jung took it further to state that we have some sort of nuclear center that could be a stone, crystal, mandala, some sort of symbol. But basically, the ideas that are attributed to Freud and Jung can be found in most myths. And what I will do is send you a very simple myth text, one page of a myth you all know very, very well. And I will attach it to the video in which I give these links. And for your task this week, and you can do this on the actual comment on the video, your task this week is simply to identify Freudian or Jungian elements in that story. So put a paragraph together, put it on the video. This will be task 10. And then just identify what you see in the story that you think is attached to Freudian or Jungian ideas. And that's what we're going to do for this part of the class. So the next video will be more about the completion of the class and the final coming up in a week or so. I'll see you then.